So good afternoon. We're live here from the beautiful Palais des Nations in Geneva. I'm here with two very special guests. But first of all, my name is Usha Selvaraju and I'm from the International Organization of Employers. So here our discussion is going to focus on labor migration and the role that it plays in doing business. And I'm here today, very luckily, with two very, very special guests, Patricia Gieskes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Mr. Farooq Ahmed from the Bangladesh Employers Federation. So welcome to both of you. Very glad to have you with me.
Thank you.
So I'm very interested, I'm going to start with you, Farooq, if I may, around the question of what exactly is currently the employer's view on labor migration in the context of the International Labour Conference?
Thank you, Usha. First of all, let me express my sincere thanks to the ILO governing body for choosing this particular important issue of labor migration to be discussed as one of the agenda items in this year's International Labour Conference. Migration is getting extremely important for the development of our countries, particularly I come from Bangladesh. It's a lower middle income country. So our economy is very much dependent on the remittance that we receive out of the migration. And we have over 10 million workers deployed in various countries. And our main focus and concentration is on the Middle East. So this particular issue is extremely important for us. It's not only that I mentioned as a lower middle income country, but also where our migrant workers are working. It's also equally important for those countries because our workers are contributing for their economic development also. So it's very, very important for us from that aspect. And particularly from Bangladesh or from Asia, mostly we send unskilled or semi-skilled worker. So skills training is extremely important in terms of migrant workers. And in this year's labor conference, particularly the skills issue is coming up. At the same time, ethical practices, proper rational code of conduct, then good governance in terms of migration. All those issues are being discussed, which are extremely important for all of us from that aspect.
Super. Wow. So it seems like a whole range of different issues that are being raised within the discussion on labor migration. So it sounds pretty meaty.
Yes, exactly.
Good. Excellent. I'm turning now to you, Patricia. So you've come to us from the DRC.
Yes.
But not only that, you are an entrepreneur.
Yes.
And you've started, if I understand correctly, your own recruitment company.
Yes.
And so if I can bounce back on what Farooq has just said, some of the ideas in terms of how some of the people that you work with, the issue of labor migration is something that's crucial to the work that you're doing. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about that and what is the actual context that labor migration, or what are the actual issues, that labor migration brings to someone like you working in the field that you work in?
Mm-hmm. Well, the subject is actually extremely wide, as Farooq just mentioned, and indeed it is extremely important that we're actually raising this issue now, and at ILO to realize how important that is. And indeed, in DRC, me running a recruitment agency, it's extremely important because at the moment we're having lots of brain drain. I mean, people that are leaving the country or maybe have not been to the country. We need skilled people, but we also have actually migration as such because of the borders that we have. We have 9 borders. So 9 borders means that there's lots of influx coming in, coming out. You see, so it's basically, I wouldn't call it a problem, but it really is a situation. And from a recruitment point of view, myself being a migrant, because I've migrated a lot in different countries, Europe and in different countries in Africa, I do understand that policies are extremely important. I do understand that communicating about migrants is also extremely important because sometimes they'll move around, they can't find their places, they don't know where they are, what they can do. And basically myself, I work at the Commission of Decent Work, okay, for peace and resilience. So we know how important that is, and we really truly try to come up with policies that are also applicable, because that's also something, writing a text, but then you must bring it in the reality. You must bring it to Federation. I'm from the Federation of Employers of DRC, and then you must bring it there too, you see, and make sure that we keep everybody happy, because you've got the local context, and DRC being what it is, we want to make sure that when people migrate, there is no fear, because that's also a problem. Sometimes you can have some xenophobic behavior, which is also not good, because then people have the feeling that only the outcomers get the job, and because there is a skill difference, there is a level difference between the people, and so we try to work around that. We also try, when companies ask us for profiles, we really try to make sure that there's a balance between candidates that are locals and candidates that come from abroad. You see, because it's such a richness. It brings so much, in exchange between people. That's what we try to do. It's not always easy to maintain the balance because of the skill level. Obviously, Farooq mentioned this, and but we pay attention to this. We really do pay attention to this.
Fantastic. Okay. So again, I think a huge range of issues tied in with the issue of labor migration there as well, is in your context as well.
Yes,
just to kind of recap for those who are just joining us, we're here live from the International Labour Conference here at the Palais des Nations in Geneva. I'm here together with employers' representatives from Bangladesh and from DRC. And some of the issues that we're talking about, just to kind of situate this discussion, relate to the issue of labour migration. And some of the topics that we've talked about relate to skills. You mentioned the word brain drain. Some of the issues that are coming out really relate to, really quite a whole range of different aspects. You also mentioned, Farooq, something about responsible recruitment. Maybe you could expand a little bit about that. Maybe give us some examples, if you can, of where you think that's worked really well, either in Bangladesh or elsewhere.
Yeah, certainly. Prior to that, I would like to also highlight a little bit about the governance of migration, which is extremely important. There are various stages involved in the total governance. One is the pre-migration stage, during the migration, and also post-migration. And then also we are concerned of the proper absorption of the returning migrant workers when they come back after completion of their contract or tenure. So each of the phases are extremely important, and these should be regulated through transparent policies, so that there is no loopholes in between. In most of our countries, particularly countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, or that to Indonesia, Philippines, there are lots of intermediaries that they work. So they should be brought under a certain code of conduct. There should be proper guideline as to how to regulate the whole process. So from that aspect, all these issues are being discussed this time, and there are already various instruments on migration. So these issues are also being discussed. How can we ensure proper implementation of those policies, of those decisions that has been taken earlier also? In 2016, there has been introduction of a fair recruitment guidelines by the ILO in 2016, where I was also deeply involved while formulating that particular guideline. But then the main weakness that remains in implementing by the various stakeholders, the involvement of the government, involvement of the employers, and also recruiting agencies. So number of important stakeholders that play around while implementing the governance issue, and fair recruitment is extremely important from that aspect. And in our part, in the Asian region, so far my experience is relatively better, or recruiting agencies are more organized from that aspect in Philippines. Bangladesh is trying hard to regulate. The government is extremely committed. to bring everyone under the same platform through a transparent policies, through discussions with various stakeholders. So capacity building of the stakeholders, capacity building of the government, capacity building of the employers, capacity building of the recruiting agencies is also an extremely important factor, which we are discussing in current year's debate. And we are seeking support from the development partners and from other agencies, including ILO, to provide us with sufficient technical assistance so that we can build up our ability, we can build our capacity, so that the governance of the migration can be upgraded. And we like in Bangladesh, we have also adopted a code of conduct. But then possibly we need to do more.
Right.
We need to really strengthen our capacity to implement those code of conducts in the right manner. And we need to be very, very careful and particular about the protection of the migrant workers' right. So from that aspect also, we have a role to play, the government of both countries, particularly the sending countries as well as the receiving countries, and the employers of the sending countries, employers of the receiving countries. We need to really work together in a comprehensive manner so that the rights of the migrant workers are well protected, and at the same time the governance of the total migration takes place in a better way.
Perfect. Great. You also mentioned policies and, sort of regulation, and touched on some of these issues around sort of good governance. Do you have any examples of where you feel like, okay, this has really worked out super well, this in terms of great governance of, like a great example of really good governance for labor migration specifically, in which you think, in terms of all the aspects that we've talked about, whether that's skills, managing that skills gap, or whether that's relating to just managing the process, sort of pre, during, and post-migration, that this is something that's really worked out well?
Well, I'm not going to give you as such an example, but it's something I'd like to bring on the table. The fact that you have the GFMD, which is the Global Forum for Migration and Development, and I believe that there, what they've actually done, bringing private sector on the table through the mechanism, business mechanism, I think that was the main thing to try to bring us to the right policies, or to try to bring us to the good governance, because that wasn't part of the game before. You see, we were, as private sector, a little bit left on the side. We were not part of the discussion. But I mean, since few years now, since I think 2 or 3 years now, because we've attended many meetings actually, but I believe the fact that they've developed that mechanism, the business mechanism, that has actually, and that will change. That will bring us to the right governance and right policies, because that you want or not, when people migrate, often it has to do with work. You see, so if it has to do with work, it's work, it's employment. So if you don't bring private sector on the table, then basically government stays with a problem. I mean, they don't know really how to handle this. Whilst even migrating workforce, they'll be hired by private sector mostly, you see, or they'll develop on the private sector. So I believe that the biggest step that we've made the past, I would say 3 years since Turkey the first time, but I believe the biggest step was to to bring the private sector on the table through the business mechanism. I believe that was extremely important, and indeed we can see that more and more now there is a demand, I believe there's almost no meeting that's taking place nowadays without private sector being involved. That it's New York, that it's Bangladesh where we were last year, that is Berlin upcoming summits now, We are just part of the game, and so we can bring many things, you see, because of course we in there, we know how it functions. We meet these migrants, we with them on a daily basis, and we exactly know what the needs are, even from a policy point of view. We know what when we need to hire certain, we know what can be done or cannot be done, and I believe government hasn't the same view on it. It's normal, they regulate the government, so they'll always look at it from a different point of view. But I believe that was really the biggest step, and step by step, because the mechanism is fairly new, but step by step we're going to get with proper text, we're going to get with proper governance, proper policies to make sure that labor migration actually works. I mean, it's extremely effective, productive, and without any any fear, and for both parties, by the way, because migrating means that you eventually going somewhere to work, okay? So, but it's the other way around. You see, it's both sides. We receiving people, and we having people that are leaving, you see. And there's so many aspects that indeed government has never thought of. So when we came onto the table, we showed them that ABC wasn't done yet. And that's why now we're having more and more meetings to consider all these points to make sure that we really, up to scale, even from a tax point of view. But let's talk economy, but from a tax point of view, how do we do this? Where is the migrant going to pay his taxes? Where is it owed, etc. You see, so these are many aspects that's extremely important, and I believe now we're getting there. Of course, we're going to still meet a lot, we're still going to talk, but it's there, it's engaged already, and that's, I believe, what was one of the biggest steps of the past 3 years, I'd say. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. So I think one of the things that has come out of what you both just shared, which has kind of struck me, is the aspect of public-private partnerships.
Exactly.
So in terms of coming to the table and being part of the discussion, which is something that is fairly new for employers and for the private sector to engage in such discussions around labor migration, this is really something that's new. So that's quite exciting. For those who have just joined us, we are coming to you live from the beautiful Palais des Nations in Geneva. We are here discussing labor migration issues with two very special guests from Bangladesh and from the DRC. We're representing the employers, and we come to you bringing the perspective of the private sector in this discussion. Some of the things that we just talked about was public-private partnerships, a sort of managed process for governance of labor migration. We also talked about skills, and we also talked about the various stakeholders that are part of this discussion that need to come around the table, whether that's a private sector or the people that are migrating, people that are really affected by this particular issue, governments, member states, and so on. So I think there's a range of different things there in the mix. There is a question here from Facebook that has come through from Anders. So if I may maybe put this to you, Patricia, seeing as it seems to be related to your region. So the question is, what kind of specific policies could help in the DRC, and what can policies in Africa teach Europe, actually? So is there, I guess it comes back to the question of examples, are there any sort of best practices that are taking place in terms of governance in Africa that you think, well, this could really sort of be replicated or could make a difference in Europe or other parts of the world, really?
I don't know if we at the moment really have best practices as such. I believe we're fairly open country, but I still think we need to work out, because we have lots of text, basically, that has never really been applied.
Right.
You see, so the texts are there, but then they're old text. And I believe there needs to be a review. And our minister mentioned this earlier on in the assembly room about the decent work part, you see. And that was something major, because we think decent from a labor migration point of view, but we think decent from a local, I would say, point of view.
Right.
You see, because that's also something, as I was saying, to avoid any xenophobic behavior, to avoid rejection of labor migration, you need to think of your local, and that's when you think of them a bit differently. And I can't recall now of best practice as such. No, I really can't recall at the moment if there's something very specific, but I know that many countries in Africa are really considering and thinking of this, because it is something major. It really is something major due to the brain drain that we've had for the past 20, 30 years. Now, how do we get the people back? Because at the moment we're having the remittance. Okay, that's interesting, but now we need the brain, because if you don't have the brain, I mean, if you don't have the people, then you only have, I would say, foreigners, which is also strange, because you do have people outside of the country with the proper skilled, but then they don't come back. So we need to find ways, and I believe that is very political too. You see, I mean, we're not there to go into the politics, but I believe it's extremely politics. You know, how you manage your politics towards locals, and I know that we're busy with that. That I know for a fact that we're really busy talking about this, and it is not easy. It is not easy,
A lot of complexity again, I think. Yeah.
A lot, yes.
Okay.
I'd just like to supplement what Patricia said. In fact, we have existing policies because there are various forums, like for example GFMD, which is extremely involved in the migration process. Then we have Colombo process, we have Abu Dhabi dialogue. These are the platforms that regularly really think about this migration, and there has been already existing tools, international tools, and also based on those international tools, all respective governments involved in the migration process have brought out various policies, laws, etc., etc. But then the major drawback that, according to my experience, is the implementation of those policies, laws and regulations. The government in respective countries, I am more than sure, in each and every country they are trying their best, but then the government has its own limitations. They do not have that much of capacity to really implement and enforce the already the code or guidelines that has been already prescribed. So capacity building is extremely important. And the reality is we don't really live in a perfect world. There are imperfections everywhere. So we got to minimize it, minimize the perfection. And particularly the Sustainable Development Goals also have given high priority to the migration issue. So we have a total vision, particularly on migration. What we need to do, we need to really comprehend all those existing policies, and then we need to focus on the capacity building, on the implementation. Side by side, we got to upskill our workers. The world of work is changing. It's nothing constant because of the innovation, because of the technology. Things are changing. Style and design of work is changing. Various needs and necessities, new types of needs and necessities are arising. So you got to suit on all those issues. So depending on all those things, I should emphasize that it is the capacity building of the stakeholders, then training the migrant workers to upskill them. That's going to really bring a totally good environment in the whole migration process.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. Excellent. So there's a question that's just come through here, which I'd like to ask, to both of you really, but maybe start with you, Farooq, that's come through from Ahmed, when he asks, when do we prepare labour for migration? And do we also put sufficient importance in training them for the culture shock that they will face once they've changed their working environment? So in terms of employers, you in your own right, but in terms of maybe some of the people that you work with as well, and maybe also thinking a little bit further in terms of the global implication of what this might mean of having people moving, really in relation to the fact that they're working. To what extent do you think people are actually prepared for that change, going beyond just the actual sort of brain power that they're carrying with them, but are they actually prepared for the country in which they're going to land?
Well, first of all, it's an excellent question, and I thank whoever has sent the question. Preparation is a continuous process. So it's going on. Maybe another issue that it reminds me what we discussed, the lack of information or data. We do not have updated and sufficient, adequate and accurate information on the migration. Say, for example, Bangladesh is one of the largest sending countries in the world. We do not have detailed, accurate, updated picture what sort of job vacancies that exist in Europe, in other countries in Middle East. So that data updating process is also extremely important, based on which we can prepare our potential migrant workers, we can train them accordingly, so that whenever they go to country of destination, they can be nicely fitted into all those jobs. This is one issue. The other one is the cultural shock. This is extremely important, definitely. Someone maybe lived for last 20 years, 25 years. That's the normal rational age when someone attempts to migrate to some other country, maybe at the age of 20, 22 or something like that. So long lived in one particular, his or her own native country, and suddenly going to a foreign country, that brings a big change in all together. So for that, there is a separate need for a separate preparation from that aspect. In Bangladesh, what we have done, particularly the government has done, there are short courses, like for example, 3 weeks course, 5 weeks course. Those have been introduced on country-specific basis. Say, like for example, some types of appropriate courses for a potential migrant workers to be migrated to Middle East. What is the culture there? What is the environment? What is the weather? What is the behavior of the common people? What are the needs? And what are the day-to-day issues? And what is their potential lifestyle in a family? How an Arab family lives? What is the expectation out of the migrant workers? Maybe a domestic worker, or maybe a technician or something, whatever it is. So some sort of briefing is definitely given to him or her through a short course of 3 to 6 weeks, maybe. But that is not sufficient, definitely. For having lived for 25 years in a native country, and for only a 3 weeks course and going somewhere else, it's not sufficient. But however, still I would say that something is better than nothing. So from that aspect, we are trying. Maybe some sort of tools may be further developed. There are small handbooks also. These are available. That has been published by our government. So this minimizes the shock to some extent. But I won't say that total shock can be taken care of. Thank you.
Great.
Well, our interesting question for me, because there I'll speak as an ex-IOMers, because I've worked for IOM, and I'm actually very glad that ILO has partnered. They've joined hands with IOM, because I've worked a long time on the AVR program, which is a voluntary return program, and of course on the migrating programs too. And IOM has developed that. IOM has centers for Central and Eastern Africa. It takes place in Nairobi, and they actually do have their centers where people are going to be trained for quite a while before departing to the country of destination. And upon arrival, they'll also have a certain time, trainings, to make sure and to question them as how do they feel? Because having a training and reading stuff on papers are different than really living it on a day by day. And I know we've had this program, as ex-IOM, but the program was running for Canada, for instance, and it's just amazing because the fact that there was a follow-up helped the people, you see, because then they could really say what they were thinking, how they felt about that cultural shock, you see, because telling you something, as long as you haven't put it in practice or you haven't lived it, you haven't touched it, you actually don't really know. But I know that IOM has that program, and like I say, I'm very happy that in this GFMD, platform, we all joined hands actually. And when I say we, I feel like I'm part of all of them. I'm part of ILO, IOE, IOM, etc. And it's very interesting because we just so much all related to each other. That's why you can never leave one stakeholders apart.
Right.
We need each other. We all have our expertise and we all need each other. Government needs point of view of workers, point of view of employer, of private sector. But at the same time, ILO that's very much into the world of business, the world of work, needs to know how migrants actually behave, what should be best. And I like when there's such a teamwork. You see, it really shows that every single stakeholder is supposed to be part of it. And I really think it's extremely interesting. Like I said, I've been part of this program, so it's just funny for me to be here and then to speak about this many years down the line.
That's
You
great.
see, so
I think, being able to have an understanding of all the different stakeholders from a
Exactly.
personal experience of having,
yes,
been part of the different environments
yes,
speaks to the power probably of the public-private partnership,
yes, for sure.
which I feel is an issue that is, really coming out in what both of you are saying.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
I think that's great. Just in terms of maybe some of the aspects that we talked about, I'm going to try and sort of bring it back to what you were saying about a sort of personal experience, bouncing off the fact that you've had all these different sort of exposures to,
Yes.
to different contexts in which you've worked. Is there maybe a personal story that you have there in terms of what you've experienced in terms of growing up or having spent time in Europe and then now you're based in the DRC?
Well, as one of the person asked, about the cultural shock, and I believe that's been to me the most difficult and the most interesting. And I also truly believe that we do underestimate this. When you are, I'll take my example, when you're supposed to have African origins, people would think that it means that when you're in Africa, automatically you know how it works. You understand how the system works, how people think, how they behave, etc. And it's not the case. And that is also something. And it's more and more, I see young people now when I look at TV in Europe that are a bit lost because they're considered as coming from somewhere else while they're born in Europe, they're raised in Europe, but because they have, or the parents have a different origin, then we assume that they are from that country, which is not always the case because they're really different. And that's something that we need to discuss. That's where people are actually lost because in the country where they're born, they do not originate from there, though they're born there. But then in the country where the parents come from, they are also not really from there because sometimes they don't even know the place. They've never been to the country, you see. So, but we like to assume, and I've seen it with recruitment world actually, that's quite often company will ask you, they want to develop a new, they in Europe or in America, whatever, and they want to develop a branch or something in Southern Africa, for instance, and they'll think, okay, we'll just take an African and it's going to work. And it is not the case. It is not true. You see, it's strange to say that, but it is really a fact that many just don't know the other place. I mean, the origin or where the parents actually came, not even the person, but the parents came from, you see. And that is also something, an aspect that we need to look at, you see. And it goes back to who are we? Who are these migrants? And I've seen it in some texts that we're working on now because I'm working here on the convention, the recommendation 71, refugee, migrants, and so on. And it is fairly difficult because then you have generations staying in the other country. They consider themselves as part of that country.
Right.
But then sometimes you have trouble and then, not that they have to go back, but sometimes they do go back to the country of origin, which they really don't know anymore.
Yeah.
They left when they were very young, and it's not that easy. You see, that is also something that we need to pay attention to. Actually, I don't just assume that people just know because eventually someone from the family originated from there, you see. So I believe to me the most difficult was the cultural shock. And when people assume, but it's both. They assume you're a foreigner or they assume you're local. So it's both. You confronted with both problems.
With the two sharp ends of the
exactly.
issues.
They just sometimes they just want you to be a local and you should understand. And sometimes they just consider you as a foreigner, total foreigner. So you've got both actually.
Okay.
So that was in my personal experience the most difficult, to actually not totally belong while you should belong, but you don't really belong.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. I have maybe a little bit more time I think we're running out of time actually.
Oh.
So I'm going to just basically thank you both for taking part in this.
Thank you.
I would like to say that essentially, I think some of the issues that we covered on this topic of labor migration really affect various issues in terms of skills. We covered governance issues. We covered capacity building. We covered all the different stakeholders that need to be around the table as well to participate in this, and also the history, which is pretty short in terms of the involvement of the private sector and having their place, their legitimate place at the table to maybe make a difference in terms of labor migration. So I want to thank you again for being part of this, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and we would like to also thank the ILO
Yes.
for really bringing this particular issue
Yes.
as one of the agenda items in this year's ILC. So thank you all.
Yes, and thanks to IOE too. Thank you very much.